A second?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Abstain.
Wait a minute, we don't have a quorum.
Dale, Brad, Bud.
Unless that was one of the days you were sitting in town.
No.
On the 24th.
So the 24th, we only had, we only had 4 people,
Three and
So
Bud.
that's a quorum.
so we're good.
Yeah.
Okay.
you're good. Yep.
Okay,
What about June 14th?
we're all set.
Okay, and then June 14th?
Yeah. We're just double checking to make sure. Yeah. Okay. 3 out of 4 are present for that, so the next up is approval for the meeting minutes of June 14th, 2018.
So moved.
Need a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Abstain.
Okay,
Okay.
it's passed.
Next item up is administrative approval request. 126 Summersea Road. This is kind of an interesting background, and I'll have the council kind of briefly describe what the request is all about and what the background is leading up to the request.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Hayes. I'm the attorney for representing Hosang and Linda Kwok. They're the current owners of 126 Somersea Lane, which is in New Seabury. The property.
Great movie.
Okay. The property abuts Ann's Cove, and they've had a dock at the property since 1994. With an order of conditions issued by this commission and a special permit. And if I may, pass this out, if you don't mind.
I think they all have
You all
copies of
copies
the
of
order
that?
of condition with a page on it. Should
Okay.
be in your blue folders.
The order of conditions, if you notice on it's paragraph, continuing condition number 37.
Does everybody have that?
Man, I'm still digging.
Should be
It's
just
on
a
the
one
left
page-
side?
One page
It'll be on the
copy.
left side, yes.
Okay, there it is. I'm just trying to relate to 126 Summersea. I'm trying to remember which home on Summersea this is.
Well, I was there a couple of days ago. This is probably, I call it, I don't want to say this to my clients a lot, but this is a tear down in the middle of the big houses. There are
Okay,
4 or
one of-
5.
pagoda kind of a house?
Kind of,
Round,
yes. It's
kind
got
of a
a, it's
round
got a
roof?
diamond-shaped
Yeah, okay, oh, I got it.
deck,
Okay.
deck on it, and then if you look at houses on either side, all look like they've been,
Yep,
you know,
exactly. I know the house now,
rebuilt,
thank you.
since this one looks like it goes back to, I can remember, I actually grew up in Yarmouth, I can sort of remember when New Saybrook was first
Mid-century.
developed. Yeah, mid-century modern, there you go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
this,
modern and-
anyway.
yeah.
But anyway, that's the one. And again, so the provision that was put in this order of conditions, I understand from Mr. McManus, he's never seen it in any other order of conditions in town. And apparently, when they applied for the permit, this is again my client's predecessor back in 1994, they said we only plan to use it for a dinghy or a small, like under 5 horsepower boat. So that got placed in the order of conditions. My client, meanwhile, been there about 4 years. My understanding is he has been using it. He has a 25-foot boat. He's been in there, and again, hasn't been enforced. And this is, you can't really see the pictures. Maybe you can see them. Are they in their packets? It's hard to see that one, but
Yeah, let me, I can fix the lighting.
okay.
Make it a little bit easier to see.
So yeah, this again, pictures I took a couple of days ago. The subject dock is the one on the upper left, just looking straight out from the land. Then looking to the right, the dock next door to it, you can see there's looks like roughly a 25-foot boat with 2 large outboards up in the air. And then looking down the other way, several docks. My understanding is, larger boats do use all those docks. There weren't any there when I was there the other day. My client now has the property up for sale, and of course, anybody who looks at the Registry of Deeds records and looks at it closely, they're going to see this restriction on there. And even though it, again, we can tell somebody it, hasn't been enforced, but we'd like to get something rather than going through an entire amendment to the order of conditions, if we get something administratively indicating that this provision can be waived.
So, yeah, the orders have already received a certificate of compliance, so you can't, the homeowner can't go back in and amend it, it's closed out. So, I looked back in the meeting minutes, I couldn't really discern, it seems to me that this condition was put in because of the previous homeowner's specificity about the use of the dock. It wasn't anything that came from the commission or anything that was warranted from the Wetlands Protection Act, because Aquay Bay is not land-containing shellfish. It's very mucky, very shallow. Many of these dock owners have to use the tides to get in and out of their dock. And there are no outstanding water resource restrictions. It's not ACEC. And there are no other restrictions of any nearby docks to this home of a similar nature than what you see in this order of conditions. So it was my suggestion to have them come in to seek an administrative request for your approval, to have us draft a letter relieving them of this condition, so they can have something of documentation from the commission that says this condition no longer applies. But as far as any, repercussions or impacts on resource areas, you're not going to see anything that isn't already, in use out there as far as larger boats or deeper draft engines. So it's
Okay,
not anything
but now
that's-
that isn't exactly, a determining factor. Is there also boilerplate language just to prevent scouring the bottom or that sort of thing?
I'd have to take another look through. There wasn't anything that I saw in the order of conditions that related to land containing shellfish or land under the ocean. I think it had boilerplate language that the commission, again, I'll have to read through, but that they reserve the right to require additional measures to protect resource areas subject to protection under Wetlands Protection Act, Chapter 131, Section 40, or Chapter 172 of the Mashpee Code. That's kind of like a boilerplate in any instance where if there are adverse impacts realized long after or even shortly
Okay,
after.
I just didn't want to give the impression that we're now saying, well, if all the neighbors are doing it, it's okay, because that's simply not the case.
Right.
In this case or any other, that's not a criteria that the commission can use.
Right.
I think here really the argument is that it was put in here where it's not normally a condition in similar.
Right.
And it's not a condition on any of the other properties along the
No, I looked at
side
the
of Summersea Road
the
that had.
adjacent order conditions for the adjacent properties, and there was no such restriction in any of them. Yeah.
Now, we do generally require, when we're giving these kind of permits, that boats don't go into place that do damage to the bottom. Should the letter
The
mention
letter can
something like
reflect
that?
Sure, yeah.
All right, so now, on the paperwork here, it says we're just removing the end clause, everything following notice of intent.
Well, that's, the thing is, you can't amend it. You can't amend the permit, it's closed out. So I would just ignore that, because that just can't be done. It's been recorded and closed out. So
Okay.
I think and I'm not a legal expert, but I would think that some sort of documentation from the Conservation Department authorizing relief of this condition based on a vote of the commission at a public meeting should suffice for new territory.
That is
So
certainly my hope.
I would-
It
I
would be
would-
up to
I
the
would-
attorney for
Yeah.
the buyer. As an attorney myself in real estate,
And so
I
someone
would take a lot of comfort from
buyer
that.
sees the deed restriction that's supplied with a
Mhm.
letter dated, it's in the public record, that should,
Yeah, so we're
legally
going,
speaking.
so we're going to inform them that we don't feel that that clause is really material to protecting the well-being of the waterway or,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah,
affecting any of the performance standards.
right.
So we're not really changing the order of conditions. What we're really doing is simply writing a letter for the file for the Registry of Deeds, which basically says this particular clause in the open order of conditions, and now the closed order of conditions is moot, or some wording to that
I would say
effect.
Yeah.
that's basically what I'm asking for.
Essentially,
Yes.
yeah.
Right.
I would so move that we do.
Second.
I'd just like to discuss it a little bit further. Do you feel there's any need to talk to the town council about the formulation of this letter?
I can certainly reach out to them. I'm sure it would be something they could provide an answer for relatively quickly, do something like this. So I can communicate with town council and get their advice.
Yeah.
If they have anything additional that they recommend that we should do, we'll contact you and work through that to get it done. Okay.
So if that works well for you, Brad, in the
Oh,
motion you made,
Absolutely. Got to do that.
is there any other discussion? Are there any comments from the audience? All in favor then?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay.
passed. Before we proceed to the agenda items, now that we have a full house, people who survived the weather, I'd just like to ask if there's anyone here who has an item they'd like to bring before the commission that's not already on the agenda. Seeing none, I'm opening the 6 o'clock hearing for Joseph N. Napoli, 204 Captain's Row. This is for proposed septic system upgrade. Do we have someone here to represent Joseph N. Napoli?
Oh.
Yeah, that, per the request of the applicant, will be moved to after the 6:18 hearing.
Right, the applicant that has the same representative for both hearings, so he had requested to bump this out to the end of the hearing so we could have them both back to back. Because he couldn't get here in time for this.
Okay.
Okay, moving to 6:03.
There's no need to vote on it, it's just, I think it's, if you're okay with that,
All right.
table it.
Yeah, we'll just suspend that one, and we'll open the 6:03 hearing for Robert B. Kelly, 59 Monahonset Road. This is a proposed septic system upgrade and shed removal. It's an RDA.
Good evening, Sam Imeli with JC Engineering, representing the project here at 59 Monahonset Road. Here we'll be upgrading the existing septic system, and this design will be using a 2-compartment septic tank to pump up to the proposed leaching facility, which is located in the front of the property at the furthest distance away from the wetland in the rear. Happily answer any questions.
Pretty straightforward.
Board of Health does have a comment that says that the property is located 59 Monahonset in a Zone 2 water recharge area, and they don't have any information on file. Does anyone discuss the project with the Board of Health yet?
I believe they did submit to the Board of Health. Still waiting to hear back if they have any comments.
They're saying nothing has been filed.
Nothing has been filed. I believe we sent it over today.
Okay, that would explain it, their comments, I guess. Yeah, as long as they're been
Okay. So Drew, do you have any comments?
The cesspool pits out back, they're just gonna be covered over with lawn after they've been pumped and
Yes.
is there any, go back to the photos. I think a shed removal is also part of this, right?
Yes.
And that's where the, septic tank comes from. Is there any other removal of vegetation or any removal of vegetation that needs to be done for the work? No, access or anything. So you can see from the photos, top left, looking at it from the street to the front yard, where the leach field. Side yard showing where the existing shed is located, and then a shot of the backyard. It's a small lawn area sloping down to kind of like a little shrubby type of buffer to a freshwater wetland that's associated with Dean's Pond. You can't see the wetland, it's very thickly vegetated in the photo to the right. It's to the right of where the lawn ends, about maybe 15, 20 feet beyond that is where the wetland is. So the only disturbance within that 50-foot zone is the pumping and abandoning of the cesspool and the removal of the shed. And I think that's probably outside of 50 feet is where the pump chamber is going. So as long as they get things squared away with Board of Health, no other recommendations.
Okay. Are there any comments from the audience?
I would move for negative determination in regards to the application of Joseph N. Napoli at Robert B. Kelly at 59 Monahasset Road.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Opening the 606 hearing for Marlene Stienka, 83 Whippoorwill Circle. This is to permit an existing float and piles. It is an RDA.
Yes. I'm a homeowner, and I had some damage on this winter.
Could, for the record, would you state your name, please?
Oh, Marlene Suzanne. And so I filed for an RDA to repair 3 pilings that popped on this pre-existing ramp and float. And it's pretty clear cut, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, the other part of this was, you can all see the plan of record. You see like the dotted outline of a float. Not the one at the end of the pier, but in the middle. Everybody see that?
Yep.
Here. This dotted outline right here. So this was on the original plan that was part of the approval for the dock. And then because of water depth issues, it ended up being built out here, where it currently exists today, and you can see from the photos, this float right here. So this is really just to get that current footprint on record. It does have a Chapter 91 license. It's just the float differs from where you see there. And Shellfish and Harbor Master both signed off. Shellfish is actually, Rick York said this is a much better situation than where the float was originally proposed. It's very shallow, so it did affect shellfish habitat, and the new location is well outside of that. So, but everything that you see as part of this application is already existing today, so there's no proposed work. It's just getting the footprints on record. The RDA request.
Okay, so they got a permit from the Conservation Commission, but they asked for something different from the state?
Yes. Yeah. But basically, so it's just getting this new footprint on record, changed footprint rather.
How old is the changed permit? How old is the dock, do we know?
The house was built in '83.
Probably close to that then. Okay, it's a long time.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see any reason why we need to
Well, then
get
we
bent
would-
out of shape over it. It's just an odd circumstance that should
Right.
not have occurred, of course.
Yeah.
Motion for negative determination with regards to 83 Whippoorwill Circle.
If there are no questions from the audience about this, or comments. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye. So you have a negative determination, you're good to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Opening the 609 hearing for Scott M. and Tracy Diggins, 56 Canandaigua Avenue. This is for the proposed installation of a detached garage and the construction of a driveway. It's also an RDA.
identify who you are and tell us what you're gonna do.
Tracy Diggins, and we're looking to put a garage in the northwest side of our property.
So could you describe the work you're planning?
I'm sorry?
Just briefly describe the work you're planning?
We put a garage in the back corner of our property. We've gotten the variances and stuff. They said that we needed to have an approval through you guys, through
Yep.
conservation, due to
Okay.
a buffer or something to wetland.
Okay.
Yeah, 73 feet away from the wetlands.
So Drew, did you talk to us about this?
Yeah, so this was, it's what we refer to as isolated land subject to flooding or an isolated wetland. There was some, it's actually on the property next door to this one where the wetland is, but the buffer zone extends into this area. So you can kind of see like this, here's the home where the garage is proposed over here. And you can see this kind of dark area here. That's the wetland, that's the depression. Currently, it's filled with a lot of landscape debris and leaves, so there's no standing water, which is still kind of surprising given how much rain. That may have changed actually today.
Different story
There's
tonight.
probably a pool of water in there now. But it does lie within 100 feet of where it's in the outer, it's probably, the garage is in the 80 to 90 to 100 foot setback from this wetland. The wetland was contested as a wetland back before my time, when the house, I think on 50 Canachet was constructed. And it did turn out that the commission did recognize it back then as a wetland, and it's categorized as isolated land subject to flooding. So it doesn't always have water in it, but it does carry water for a portion of the year, and then thus could serve as vernal pool habitat. So that's the jurisdiction. This is just a couple of photos. You can see the proposed plan and the delineated wetland off the lot
73 feet.
up here. Then just a couple of photos show you the shot of the house from the street. And down here, this is the general location of where the garage structure will be. So it's all just previously maintained backyard area. And this is a shot looking from close to the edge of the wetland back over to where the garage is going. So you can see it's all just been maintained lawn / landscaped areas in the entire buffer to the wetland.
This previously disturbed area is what that garage was.
That, yeah, in this general, is that right, is that accurate, where this area here where I have the,
With the fence
With
laying
a
up
fe-
on the,
yeah.
the
Okay.
wall,
yeah, okay. Yeah.
the boat.
Yep. No other comments? I would recommend a negative determination.
I would so move.
If there are no comments from the audience,
Oh, dear.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Opening the 612 hearing for Robert S. and Martha Johnson, 6 Jehu Pond Road. This is for proposed additions to existing dwellings, installation of a swimming pool, extensive hardscape and landscape modifications, mitigation plantings, septic system upgrade, removal of an outhouse, and construction of a connecting driveway to structures on the property. This is continued from June 14th due to a lack of a quorum. It's an NOI.
Mr. Chairman, I'm recusing myself from this.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Matt Costa, Cape and Islands Engineering, representing the applicant. We're here tonight before you under a notice of intent application for some various site improvements, which I'll go through in more detail. As you see, Drew's got the site pulled up on the screen here. This is 6 Jehu Pond. This is their access that goes out to Great Oak Road. The site currently houses an existing dwelling up here, a cottage down here, a second cottage down here with boat ramp. Another accessory structure over in this location, then a pier, and you can't see it from this photo, but there's a seawall there. Your resource areas for this project include land under the ocean, land containing shellfish, salt marsh, land subject to coastal storm flowage, coastal bank. Also, this project is located in the ACEC. The ACEC boundary for this project is flood zone based, so it's below the flood zone line. Flood zone line is the line of the ACE boundary. Drew, can you flip to the plan? You have the photo one? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to run through the improvements on the site. And part of this application, I'm requesting a waiver, so I'll end with the item that we're requesting a waiver on. So first, we're proposing to install a patio down here associated with this cottage area. Steve, for your benefit, it's this one right here. This patio is located in legally previously disturbed buffer zone area, as you can see, and is not moving any closer to the resource area. There's a second patio over here. This patio, even though it's hard to tell from this image, this is an aerial image that was taken in the last month. And it's got the tree canopy here, but there's a patio that's proposed right in this area right here. Now this patio is moving closer to the resource area than the primary structure, and is part of our waiver request. The patio does have mitigation that's associated with it. It is located in legally previously disturbed area also. As we move up to the house, we're proposing an addition to the garage area. So there's an addition on the main structure here, and then addition along the front of the house. The additions also, in addition to the additions, we're going to be installing a new Title V septic system. This Title V septic system is going to collect all of the flow from all the cottages. So what we're doing is we're installing a new pump chamber down here. We're going to tie the cottages into this pump chamber here, and we're going to pump that up the hill into the proposed relocated driveway area. And this septic system is also going to have a denitrification unit added to it. So there's a substantial improvement, environmentally speaking, from what exists today, just from the addition of this septic system to the unit component. These dwellings down here do have a septic system that's down in the ACEC area, and they do, believe it or not, have an existing outhouse that's down there, right in this location. Part of the landscape improvements that we're going to do will be to realign the driveway, regrade this area out here. There's also an existing path that runs down from the driveway. Steve, for your benefit, again, up on that screen, that's what I'm talking about right there. That driveway path is going to be relocated slightly, and we're doing this to lessen the slope. So it's a rather steep little driveway access right now, and we're adding some length to it to decrease the amount of slope that's there, and will also help for erosion. We're proposing to replant the disturbed area. We're also proposing an additional driveway access point that will connect the two here out towards the road. That driveway access point is so that we can have actual traffic circulate through the site. This is too steep for a car. This would be more of a golf cart or walking area down there. This would be suitable for car traffic, so you could drive around and not have to leave and K-turn to get back in, but they could drive down and up two different areas. Lastly, we're proposing a pool in the back of the primary structure. And this pool is moving closer to the wetland, to the resource areas, and does trigger the waiver requirement, in addition to the patio in this area. So, now we get to the waiver requirement. So, as you know, when we look at the waiver, we have to evaluate this on 3 criteria. The first criteria is how compelling is the need. The second criteria is to what degree are we asking to relax the normal standards. And the third criteria is to what degree are we compensating for what relief we are getting. So in this instance, in particular the pool, there is no real compelling need for a pool in this particular area. So when we move to the second criteria, we're looking at what degree are we asking for relief. Now, what we have here is a situation where we're locating a pool in the backyard, and this property did receive a certificate of compliance within the last year. So the site is compliant right now. We're proposing a pool in an area that has been disturbed and has been manicured. Part of the pool proposal would be to take down 3 trees that are in that area. We're proposing to compensate for those trees by planting 6 additional trees within the same buffer zone area. We are proposing some retaining walls around the pool and then some fencing around the pool patio area. And we're proposing mitigation to be planted right up against the fencing. The pool right now, as proposed, is located 15 feet from the top of the coastal bank. The primary structure is 33 feet from the top of the coastal bank. So we're moving about 18 feet or so closer. This 15-foot buffer from the top of coastal bank has been something that the board has approved before in fairly similar circumstances. This lot is not like any of the other lots that the board has seen before. And there are some significant differences to that, which I'll speak to in a moment. In particular, the flood zone boundary line is the line of the ACEC in this area. The flood zone boundary line is actually behind the coastal bank line. The coastal bank is delineated using the town's criteria for slope. So that's why the coastal bank is above the flood zone line in this particular instance. So where we have the pool situated now, we are not moving closer than the closest cleared edge of vegetation. What I'm trying to say is where we have this pool, this area right in here, right up there, that area is already a cleared line that's there. So we're not clearing closer to the wetland. What we are proposing is a significant amount of mitigation to replant that area back. So we feel that the degree that we're asking to relax or to seek that relief is minimal. It's moderate. It's something that has been approved before, and we feel that it is reasonable. So when we don't have a compelling need, and it is a moderate request, then what we need to do when we compensate is we need to go above and beyond to help balance this project. So to help balance the no compelling need portion, what we've done is we've calculated mitigation for both the patio and the pool areas based on the waiver criteria, which, if you remember, follows a 5-foot step increment. And with this pool being located primarily within that 50-foot buffer, which is your area where there's highest ratio of mitigation required, it computes a significant amount of mitigation area. So we end up with, and I'll call your attention down to the mitigation calculation notes on the plan, if you'd like to see how we arrived at that number. We arrived at 5,809 square feet of mitigation plantings. That's above and beyond the proposed tree for compensation for the tree taken down, and above and beyond the installation of the septic system and the voluntary addition of the denitrification system. So when you look at the mitigation well, first I should tell you what we're proposing is we calculated 5,809 square feet. We're actually proposing 8,866 square feet. So we've increased that by 52%. So we have gone way above and beyond what that actual requirement is. And now, this lot does differ from similar circumstances where you have approved waivers of equal degree of equal buffer zones. And with respect to this particular area, similar situations to that. This lot is an extremely large lot. So the first thing, and Drew is not a fan of this pool location. I've gone over this with a couple of times, and I'm going to do my best to try to address his concerns. But the first thing you look at is you go, why is this pool being there? You have so much room, put it someplace else. So when we look at the lot, you have to start to section out the areas that are usable, and I put together a little sketch that's sort of the feasibility of the alternative pool locations that I just want to show you. So I'll hand that, Drew's already seen this, to you guys. See that? And what I'm trying to show you here is just what the alternative locations really are. And then as you'll see from the yellow hatching, those are the alternative locations. So we don't, because of zoning, there's under local zoning, we cannot put a new structure in an ACEC. So we can't put this pool, which would require a building permit. We can't add that in the ACEC area. So all of the ACEC area is out. So that's what the yellow line is on the plan. It basically follows the 25-foot off the ACEC buffer zone. 25-foot buffer off the ACEC zone. So you can't have additional accessory structure or primary structure within 25 feet of an ACEC, not only in it, but within 25 feet of it. So that entire portion of the lot is not available. That leaves an area up near the dwelling over here. This is the side of the dwelling, Steve, for your benefit right here. This is the north side of the dwelling. In this location, we could physically put the pool there. It would require taking down a total of 12 trees. We only require 3 trees in this area. Secondly, it would drastically reduce the amount of mitigation because it wouldn't trigger a waiver because it would be behind the primary structure. That on its face might seem reasonable, but what happens is we lose all of the mitigation that we're proposing, and we believe that the way that this project has been designed, there is a net environmental benefit when it's done, and that was on purpose. So what we looked at is that considering the proposed pool, the waiver, the relief that we're requesting, we proposed various types of mitigation through plantings, improved wastewater treatment, and we are trying to end the project with a net environmental benefit. And if we were to put the pool in this area, we'd lose a lot of the mitigation that would go along with that. And a lot of this mitigation is going immediately adjacent to the ACEC, and in a large portion of it, it's going directly into the ACEC. So all the green areas that are shown on the plan, those are your mitigation areas we're proposing. So you can see in a lot of these circumstances down below near the cottages, that's all within the ACEC. A portion of it along the bank is immediately adjacent to the naturally vegetated buffer. So we're expanding the naturally vegetated buffer, which is ideal under the regulation. And we're putting the mitigation out front in this area, which portion is within the ACEC, the portion is above it, and that that is also augmenting naturally vegetated areas. So there is a big benefit there. But most importantly, it is on the north side of the house. There's not an ideal location, and it's not something that the client would like. It could physically work, and it could work under zoning, but we feel that if it was proposed there, they probably wouldn't they wouldn't do it at all. And we would lose mitigation that was going to be included in this, and that would take away from the net environmental benefit that we're trying to go for. So we're trying to ask for some relief, but we're trying to really balance that criteria out and give back. The other alternative areas are hatched areas to the south of the driveway. Steve, again, right up here, you see that one area, and then the big area above it. The area the south of the driveway, not ideal at all. It's totally naturally vegetated. There's a tremendous amount of trees there. The area up north on the where the existing garden area and driveway is would seem as though it would make a lot of sense. It's already a clear area. It doesn't require a lot of trees. It's out of the 100-foot buffer. But it's in the front yard and it's far away from the house, and it creates a safety problem because the pool will not be visible from the house. That's another area that they would not feel comfortable with at all and won't do it because it creates a safety concern and liability for them. So when we look at the three different areas that we actually do have, the area that's proposed is the best of the three, and we really try to do our best to balance that waiver so that we end with that net environmental benefit.
When was
There's quite a
the,
few things going on. I just wanted to run through this to make sure I wasn't forgetting anything. We're going to be adding some dry wells to the structure to recharge roof runoff, and we'll be managing all stormwater runoff from the pool patio area and collecting and discharging into dry wells to make sure that we manage that and we don't create erosion concerns. One thing I didn't mention is the limit of work will be installed along the cleared areas here, and the plantings will be going right up against it. So one of the concerns that Drew had with this is, why is this pool back there? So that's one. I went through the exercise of preparing that sketch and showing you where those criteria were. Another concern that, as I understood it, that he had is that with a vast mitigation plan like this, it creates a difficulty at times enforcing it, in particular when people come back for a certificate of compliance. They tend to change things or not follow through, and it creates a burden sometimes for the agent to reconcile this and hold people true to what they're supposed to do. So we would be voluntarily offering special conditions that would first require that the majority of the plantings be planted right away. So everything that didn't interfere with construction could be planted right away, which would be all of the stuff in the ACEC, and along the bank there would be a small portion up here they wouldn't want to plant now for construction around the house. But the vast majority of the plantings, in particular plantings within the ACEC and the 50-foot buffer zone, would be planted right away. Secondly, special condition that would require an as-built plan be submitted as part of the certificate of compliance request, and the as-built plan specifically would document all of the mitigation that was planted, the species and the plant counts, so that they took the burden off staff for enforcing any approval and any mitigation plans, because specifically we wouldn't be able to submit for in specific language that we wouldn't be able to submit for the certificate of compliance unless an as-built plan was produced that documented exactly what was required for mitigation and certified that that was installed appropriately. Thirdly, we wouldn't be opposed if the commission thought it was worth it to install a fence in this area to prevent activity from happening behind the pool area. And specifically, a special condition about no future trees being taken down along this bank. Because one of the concerns is scope creep. Sometimes people will build a project and then come back and say, you know, this tree's dropping leaves in my pool, and I want to take this tree down, it's a problem. The applicant understands fully that they would be, they would graciously take an approval here with a special condition that no other trees along that bank would be taken down unless there was very unique circumstances that were a safety hazard of some sort. But we would be opposing those type of conditions. This project, I believe, does, in lieu of the waiver request, the project does meet the applicable performance standards, which we have articulated in our narrative, and we do respectfully request you issue an order of conditions. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
That area where the pool is going, did you say that was a previously disturbed area?
Most of it, not all of it. There is some natural little clusters around the trees. See this right here? It's clustering around the trees right here. So that we would consider natural.
When was this house built?
The late 80s, early 90s.
So in terms of existing conditions, I mean, do we have any reason to think this area was heavily disturbed prior to the passage of the act?
house was actually built a while ago, but it just received a certificate of compliance prior to the sale of the property.
A few months ago.
It was never closed out, and it recently received a certificate of compliance in the last year for that previous project.
Boy, you suggested a set of mitigations which sure would challenge staff. Of course, almost nothing is visible from the road. So, in the future, making sure that none of that was disturbed, like right behind it. You did mention the possibility of a fence behind the pool, which is yet another disturbance to the bank, of course.
Yeah, but you gotta have it. But you gotta have a fence around the pool, so. Is there any concern about the neighboring condo community and privacy along that side? Is any of the mitigation something that they're doing for that reason? How far
Some
away?
of the mitigation, well, we specifically proposed 6 trees to be cedar trees along there
Mhm.
for a specific screening reason. There are native species. But yes, to answer your question, sure, yes.
There is, okay. I kind of thought that the condo community was getting close.
They haven't, we have not heard any feedback from them at all. It's the applicant that wishes to have that privacy. If you've gone out there, you see right.
Yeah, okay, I thought so.
Is there any work being proposed on that wooden deck at all? In the rear, in the photograph?
The wooden deck, yes. There's an alteration to the deck that's in that area right there.
So is the deck gonna be widened or rebuilt or what? I think.
That portion will be rebuilt.
Okay. It's all new footings and so forth on it?
I would imagine so. I don't know for sure what
Okay.
the condition of those sonotubes might be.
Okay. Thank you.
When you mentioned the idea of getting an as-built plan on all of the plantings that are gonna go in there and the other features and functions that are gonna be in this property, that you would come up with a certification of an as-built. Is that your firm that would be certifying it?
It would be anyone that was a professional registered land surveyor or anything
Good, okay, you said that, you said the right word, registered.
Yes, I think that's important.
You think it is too?
I think the commission should look carefully at plans and at what stamps they carry, if any.
Yeah, particular in an
But
as-built.
specifically, the as-built plan is also protection, not just that they did it, but that there is record. So if any application comes back again, that will be in the file, and it can be easily reconciled by a walkthrough on the site to see, because this isn't visible from the road, to see if anything disappeared or what have you.
What's your juice take on the project?
Well, as Matt said, I didn't really agree with the location of the pool and patio. This shot right here probably gives you the best indication of what the area looks like over here. And then the background is where the pool is proposed. I took another. Yeah, this one here. This is where the main body of the pool patio would occupy. I mean, the backyard it's semi-maintained, I guess you could say. Some parts are naturally vegetated, in my opinion. I would not consider it to be entirely pre-disturbed at all. I would say portions of it are. But the previous homeowner really didn't do a lot of landscaping back here. If this house was built today, it's already going over the coastal bank, and I'm quite sure in an order of conditions it would say the remaining area between the footprint of the deck and the coastal water body and ACEC should be left in a naturally vegetated state. I have no doubt that condition we put in place. But it is a pre-existing non-conforming structure. We do have a regulation that details ACEC. It's regulation 14 under the bylaw. And for performance standards, any project or activity, there shall be, for any project or activity except as noted in section 172-3, exceptions of the bylaw, there shall be no adverse effect on the interest/wetland values as expressed in section B, which precedes this, about naturally vegetated buffer strips. By altering its topography, soil structure, plant community composition, hydrologic regime, and/or water quality in such a way as to result in any short-term, immediate, and/or long-term adverse effects to these wetland values or interests, the resource areas of the lands under water bodies within the ACEC, and the 50-foot buffer between areas of alteration and said water bodies. I think that given the size of the lot, and I understand Matt's concerns about those alternative locations, I think they're still doable, as opposed to this particular location where you would be removing some natural vegetation. You'd be having to do some pretty significant grading, so that changes the runoff patterns, and that changes the groundwater recharge in that area, and the closest area to ACEC on the entire lot, changes the hydrologic regime, changes the plant community composition and soil structure, all of which are included in the performance standards of ACEC. So as long as you've got alternative locations, granted there are setbacks to each. I understand the one at the side of the house involves more tree removal, but there's been nothing discussed about reducing the footprint of the pool patio either, to reduce the number of trees removed. So you're not stuck with this particular size footprint, but you know, I don't think it's a real good comparison to compare a number of trees removed from one location to another when it's assumed the structure will remain the same size. The mitigation is substantial, but again, and I understand the commission has approved many times pools, patios, and other accessory structures in other areas, but I don't believe any of them, or not to my memory anyway, involved ACEC, and this does. And it's also a lot of pretty substantial size with other options that you can go with. Granted, there are some, convenient setbacks to each one, but I think that it's reasonable to search for another location for the pool patio area and not disturb this area. Because like I said, if this house is being proposed in this location, that area will be set aside as absolutely no disturbance. And so for a luxury structure, I think he's met that criterion for mitigation, but he hasn't met the criterion for compelling need in this instance, and it is a very sensitive resource area, probably the most sensitive out of all the ones that are listed in the bylaw. So I think another location is warranted. in order to satisfy those performance standards under Regulation 14.
If I may, I would respectfully disagree that it alters the drainage patterns and soil conditions. And it's actually, we're going to mitigate any drainage issues. We'll collect the drainage and recharge it. It's not done anything going to change any of the any groundwater flows or patterns or anything like that. This project will actually have a benefit to all of those mentioned resource areas by improved wastewater flow, by improved naturally vegetated buffer zones. If this house wasn't built today, but this area was disturbed, I would say that there would be legal grounds for actually building a house in the same location. We are not in the ACEC, we're in the buffer zone. The commission approved not too long ago a project we did of a waiver request for a pool on Hamlin Pond, and Hamlin Pond's an ACEC. And the pool was about 10 feet, 15 feet away from the edge of the actual ACEC. We're not in it. We're not on the coastal bank. This is buffer zone work only with respect to the pool.
I would point out that that project was entirely on a pre-existing raised patio, and there was no extension
Absolutely.
outward towards the resource center.
Absolutely.
So that's not the same as this.
Well, with respect to location, proximity to the ACEC, it is
Right, but not
similar.
disturbance-wise.
Disturbance-wise, no, but we actually have greater buffer zones here, and we're actually increasing the natural buffer here. We just simply didn't do that last time. We couldn't do that last time. We did provide mitigation by way of alternative mitigation methods last time, but I don't want to get into it last time comparison, and maybe I just wanted to alert you to the fact that it isn't unique about ACEs, that's all. The projects are completely different. But in this particular circumstance, we're not encroaching on the ACEC. We are improving that natural buffer that's there. We are adding environmental benefits to this project to do protect those resource areas and actually are in benefit to each of those resource areas. So respectfully, again, that is our position.
Matt, what's the proposed patio on the pool? What's the elevation on that?
It's going to be at a walkout level down on the ground. So, Steve, look at this picture right here. So it's really hard to see, but you can walk out underneath this deck. The pool patio is going to be at grade over there.
Right,
So we
because
have
I'm seeing elevation 24 cutting through the, looks like the northeast corner of the
Yeah.
patio, and then I'm seeing 16 at the,
Yeah, we're doing
I
a
mean, southwest corner.
A two-tiered retaining wall on the north side of the pool. So there'll be retaining walls.
Into the
around
hillside,
pool.
all right, and then, all right, so you're saying that the elevation of the patio is gonna be at 18, and we're gonna be at 16 down at the southwest corner?
Something like that.
So a 2-foot drop, so you're gonna have a 2-foot sort of retaining wall around that patio then?
Yes.
2 foot high?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And then we're digging into the hillside on the northeast corner?
Yes. And then there'll be fencing around it. And we could actually pull the fencing in a little bit more to get it up. We just wanted to be able to walk around the edge of that patio, but we could pull that fencing in a little bit more in that pinch point area.
And I do understand, you mentioned it's not getting into the ACEC, but the regulation states a 50-foot buffer zone to the ACEC, which is what I was referring to, which this is getting into. And it states short-term, intermediate, and/or long-term adverse effects. And as far as the scope creep, which was mentioned earlier, I brought that up to Matt because I've seen it time and time again, particularly with pools and patios, is that when they're built, the homeowner realizes there's trees overhanging, and there are trees lining this entire area seaward of the proposed structure, that they become a nuisance. And then storms can increase that nuisance over time. And so it was a concern of mine, it is a concern of mine moving forward, even with a condition. You know, it's hard to argue with somebody when you see, a tree leaning over a pool and they make a compelling argument for a safety hazard. well, if the structure was never there, it wouldn't be a hazard. If there's an opportunity to move it back further away, it wouldn't be a hazard. And that concerns me, because I've seen it and we've dealt with it multiple times, and mostly with pools and patios. That's really secondary to just this location in general, because it makes up almost the entirety of that 50-foot buffer zone to ACEC, and they're proposing significant structure in that buffer zone. And I just don't think that's the place for it. I don't think it meets the performance standards for that regulation. And as I stated before, there is ample opportunity for other locations on this lot for the pool patio.
We have with considerable care and sensitivity to the perceived needs of the owners, granted some exceptions in locations of pools and patio, but these were cases where the lots just wouldn't support any other possible solution. Right. And where we weren't impacting so severely. I mean, this is right there on a coastal bank, which does seem to be vegetated. I'm having a really hard time seeing, I mean, let's remember, a pool is not a critical need. You know, it's just not. It's explicitly called out as not being so in the regulations. And this is a large lot. It's great to say, well, here's a place that's going to be not great for this reason, here's another place not great for that reason. This is a large lot. There is an individual who feels a desperate need to go into a pool as opposed to the body of water that's 50 feet away, could walk up into any part of this lot. I mean, there are large disturbed areas that I would think could be made available, like there's this large gravel area down near the outbuildings here, for example.
We couldn't add a pool down
That's ACEC. Can't have new structure unless restricted.
Yeah.
That's why you pointed out the other 3 locations that are outside the
I
ACEC.
also, before we completely forget that there's more than just the pool to this, I just wanted to get clarity on these proposed changes in the driveway. They're fairly substantial. Are all these new surfaces going to be permeable? They're all going to be gravel still? The cutoff here so that you can return to the property the other as you're going out. I see it's into the buffer zone. Does it have to be? I mean, would it be possible to do that a little further along, change the way that's designed?
You mean push it out towards Grado?
Towards the road.
Grado. Yeah, I think we could do that. What we're trying to do is sneak it through without taking any trees. So I could see another area we could probably do that closer to Grado.
You know, we've referenced a couple of instances tonight where we made exceptions for pools for various reasons. My concern is that I don't perceive there to be a very compelling need for it to be exactly right there. The precedent we then have to deal with in later hearings where this was done in such a way that it's virtually imposed or not. Despite the ample.
I understand the concern. I just want to make sure that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. That there is a net environmental benefit here, and that if you were to approve every project so that there was net environmental benefits to each of them, and they did increase naturally vegetated buffer strips, they did improve wastewater discharges, lower nitrogen loads on bodies of water, they did control for erosion, that would be a success. We are asking for relief. We don't have a compelling need for it, but what we did was try to really come over the top on the environmental benefit. And I understand what everybody's saying completely, but I don't want to lose that fact that this would be a benefit.
Pools pose some unique hazards to the environment. I mean, putting a pool on an embankment there. In a worst case scenario, I happen to have been aware of an incident where an entire stretch of coastal bank was destroyed when a pool failed. I mean, it's not impossible. The bottom can leak and you get a lot of water out in a big hurry. I mean, half the pool went down the bank after it being undercut, you know. That's an extreme case, but nonetheless, this is a big structure to put inside the buffer zone, right on the bank. I'm feeling very uncomfortable with it.
Wondering about this spot that is immediately adjacent to the area that you planned the pool. As an alternative, you laid it out. It gets you out of the ACEC.
What gets you out of the, it's not in the ACEC and it's not on Coastal Bank, it's in very close proximity to both.
Okay, but I'm simply saying, I'm trying to understand why there seems to be you do not want to move into this alternative number one, we'll call it, which is immediately adjacent to the pool structure that you're asking for. What is wrong with that spot? I mean, I can see why family conditions might be that you don't want to go 100, 200 feet down the road in order to get to your pool. But this is immediately adjacent to the home, and it's not that far away, but it is outside of the critical area that I think has been addressed a number of times here. Why wasn't that the preferred solution?
That is the area, it's the north side of the house, it's the most shaded area. It would be elevated up far above the walkout level, the downstairs walkout level, and what they're trying to achieve is usable space coming out from below, so you have there's continuity between the house space and the pool space. You wouldn't have that on that side. You would have some of the pool fence around it, and your access points would be around the front, so you come, or the back, you come out, go up the walkway, up the slope over to the pool area. It's just not the ideal location. From a logistical design standpoint.
I agree with Brad. I think that's the preferred location. That, you know, if you're gonna take out some trees on the north side of the house, you know, the grade, I know that the grade is a little bit higher, but you're already proposing retaining wall digging into the grade on the north side already in the buffer zone. So, yeah, the walls might be a little bit higher, but I think you can maintain the same elevation, come off that deck and have the pool on that side.
A lot of terracing, some terracing to help you manage those different elevations.
Yeah, you know, the
on that
grade, the
side.
highest looks like maybe it's, you know, between 29 and 30 there, but it falls back down towards the 24 where the wall is now. So it just, you know, I think that's the best location. And I agree with, you know, Drew's assessment, it takes you out of the coastal bank. And then what Dale said about the radius driveway out near Great Oak, if you can make that smaller radius up by the concrete posts, it still, you know, achieve the turning radius out there. I think less vegetation, trees will be removed in that spot. So that's my my
All right,
thoughts on
I
that.
think I've heard all the feedback that I need to request a continuance, so that we might be able to work on this a little bit. Is there any other comments?
I'm curious to know how you feel you can get appropriate equipment back to that pool where it is now. Do you have a way to get back there without taking out some of the other trees that are above the pool?
I think there's a regular driveway that leads to the home. I would think that's a relatively easy thing
Yeah,
to do. I mean, you're gonna-
there wouldn't be any problem getting machinery.
See, you can get beside the house there, in that, like, through that area, that's the alternative? Is that where you would go?
We could sneak through there. There's actually, believe it or not, there's room in the path to come up from the cottage. There's wide areas you can go up.
I see. Okay.
That aren't clear. I mean, that aren't vegetated. That wouldn't be a problem.
I
The
did-
other one, it shows the cottages and so forth. I think it shows how, just the pictures, there was, there you go, that's pretty wide open.
Outstanding mitigation is the hallmark of the projects you always bring before us. And, you know, I definitely recognize that, and I recognize that here, but that pool location's just a little tough.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience who had any comments or questions about this project?
I did have just one other comment in regards to the patio on one of the cottages, the proposed patio, 255 square feet. Did you have designated mitigation for that patio on this plan, or was it just kind of random? Because I'm wondering if mitigation, finding the most suitable area for that mitigation, for that expanded patio, should be close to the coastal bank and ACEC area and not out further back on the lot where you've got other I understand the mitigation with the change in pool location is drastically reduced, but does that change the option of where any mitigation goes as a result of any encroachment from what you've proposed?
If I remember correctly, I thought that had pretty good natural vegetation adjacent to it, but I could.
Right, I'm just saying, like, closer to the resource areas as opposed to some of the areas that you've got. Like, I just don't want to see mitigation for this patio be all the way back behind the beginning of the driveway, is what I'm saying.
Sure.
I want it closer, it
Well,
should be
if
closer to the
you
resource
move this
areas.
pool, you're gonna see a tremendous amount of mitigation.
Right, that's all, I just wanted to clarify that, yeah.
Okay. Continue to when?
So, 2 weeks, Matt?
Sure.
June, July. So July 12th at 6:03.
Yeah, I would move that we, at the request of the applicant, that we continue the application of Robert and Martha Johnson at 6 Yeager Pond Road to 7/11 at 6:03 PM.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, it's continued.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Opening the 6:12 hearing, I'm sorry, the 6:15 hearing of Edward J. Maher, 39 Uncatina Road, Uncatina Road, proposed planting of native shrubs and herbaceous perennials. This is an RDA.
No one's moving.
No one's here for 39 Uncatina? Guess we'll have to continue it. Perhaps the applicant didn't know he was supposed to show up.
I believe the applicant did not provide a plan for this particular project and was requested and did not fulfill that by today, from
Okay.
speaking with the administrative assistant.
Okay.
So what's the procedure here, Drew?
Well, in the absence of a request from the applicant, I think it's just courteous to accommodate one continuance on their behalf.
All right.
I mean, we
So we're going
usually have to get
assume
their
that we have
request.
a request from the applicant.
Yeah, so it would be 6:06 on July 12th.
Motion to continuance for 39 Argentina Road. Date specified.
This would be July 12th at 6:06 p.m.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, it's continued. Opening the 6:18 hearing for Richard T. Norton and Ellen B. O'Laughlin at 47 Bierce Road. This is a proposed septic system upgrade. It's an RDA.
Good evening, my name is Peter McAtee, representing Rick Norton. He is planning to sell the house, and the septic system is too close to the groundwater, and so we're proposing an upgraded leaching system, a pump chamber, to gain the separation that we need to have between groundwater and bottom of the soil absorption system. The property lies within land subject to coastal storm flowage and in the flood zone, but there aren't any wetland resources within 100 feet of the property.
Okay. All right, Drew?
Health comments. Board of Health says property is not located in a Zone 2. No information has been filed with the Board of Health. Did you talk to them today at all?
I'm on with them in about 10 minutes.
Oh, that answers that. Okay. Just to show some of the images of the property, this is looking at it with the flooded road conditions in the foreground. And then a shot of the backyard. So this is landlocked lot within land subject to coastal storm flowage. No other wetlands within 100 feet or a few hundred feet from this area. An entirely disturbed landscaped backyard and front yard. The whole lot is maintained and landscaped. So, and there is no retention of vegetation standards because the lot falls under that square footage for Regulation 25. So, no other comments.
Move for a negative determination in regards to the application of Richard Norton and Ellen B. O'Loughlin at 47 Bierce Road.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay.
And we tabled the 204 Captain's Row for Pete.
Okay, so we're not going to
Open
sign
that one up again.
Yeah, so is there someone here for,
Pete is Pete.
Oh,
there we go. Okay, so we are bringing up the suspended 6 o'clock hearing for Joseph N. Napoli, 204 Captain's Road. This is a proposed septic system upgrade. It's an RDA.
Peter McAtee representing Joseph Napoli, who is proposing a septic system upgrade to replace an existing cesspool in the backyard. All of the plumbing exits the house through the cellar floor, and so we're proposing keeping everything in a gravity system in the backyard, more than 100 feet from the salt marsh, 83 feet from the top of the coastal bank located to the west of the leaching system, and 53 feet from a coastal bank that's located to the southwest, and it's the coastal bank by virtue of its slope. The entire area lies within riverfront, and there's one tree that will be required to come down to gain access to the backyard.
Drew?
Application submitted under review by the Board of Health. Since they have a question on the number of bedrooms, but I'm sure that'll be squared away in their review. This was coming up with them too.
That's not coming up with that. Well, we're not going to be, it's something that the homeowner is working out with Harrington. He's assured him that there's going to be, yeah, in the cellar there are some rooms that could qualify as bedrooms, but they're going to
Make the unnecessary changes to, no other comments?
well, I move for a negative determination in regard to the application of Joseph Napoli at 204 Captain's Road.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Negative determination.
Thank you.
So Drew, would you like to continue with the proposed?
Yep. So you all have in your folders, there's a letter of interest from Marty Bregman, who's interested in becoming a commissioner. You're Marty, I think. If you wanted to just give this, introduce yourself to the commission, maybe a little background and.
Marty Bregman, 14 Stony Brook Road, Drive in Mashpee, which is in Southport. I'm an optician. I've been one for a long, long time. I'm also on the Board of Opticians also for the state of Massachusetts. Recently we retired down here. I had owned a condo at Katuitt Bay Condos for the last 10 years or so. Then we sold that and then moved to Southport. And I've always been interested in all types of preservation and conservation. And this opening came up, and I would like to be on the board.
Were you interested in part-time or full-time positions? We have 2 openings in our full-time membership, and I think we have 2 openings as part-time commissioner. I wasn't sure which one you were.
What's the...
Full-time is every meeting. The difference is the associate or part-time commissioners can also attend every meeting. It's recommended that they attend at least 50% of the meetings. And if you're an associate commissioner and there's a quorum, 4 or more full-time commissioners present at the same meeting, you can comment and ask questions, but you can't vote. The only time you can vote as an associate commissioner is if you make up part of that quorum, that 4-member quorum that we have on the board. So that's the essential difference. Is really time commitment is the biggest difference.
You have a meeting once a month, correct?
Twice a month, second and fourth Thursday of each month.
Okay, I mean, I don't
don't see any problem with that.
Okay,
So as of right now, I'd like to be full-time.
okay, great. You know, certainly
Questions or
need-
anything?
Tell them you get twice as much money if you're full-time.
The same as the optical board, too.
The benefits package is the same.
Exactly. Exactly.
But we do have funding for training for commissioners. There's an organization called the Mass Association of Conservation Commissioners, which is a really great organization that hosts workshops, a yearly convention, so you can get certification in wetland identification and delineation and, you know, anything and everything to do with the Wetlands Protection Act. You know, any sort of like local presentations. There's a lot of local environmental groups here on the Cape that host workshops and, you know, conferences and information, and all of that becomes available to you that we pay for when you become a commissioner. So plenty of resources for you.
It sounds, the only thing I may be getting, you know, I'm retired, I may be getting a part-time job
Okay.
that may not interfere with it, but I will still like to start off as a full-time.
Okay.
Maybe
Very good.
anything changes, could I switch?
Oh, yeah, you can certainly, we're flexible.
We
if
do
you
want to stay active in the conservation
Sure,
program.
excellent.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll be in touch, we'll have you come in and we'll go over some of the details.
Appreciate that greatly.
All right, thank you.
Should we stay?
If you wish, sure, yeah, could see how the meeting runs, yep. Next up is the continued discussion on the violations that were outlined at the last meeting for Tom Smith. This was at two properties owned by Mr. Smith. It's 226 and 266 Monomoskoy Island. I had some recommendations for enforcement issues, compliance issues at each location. Just for the commissioner's review, just from the last meeting. 226 Monomoskoy, the dock was found to not have a Chapter 91 license. Mr. Smith did come in with some information he had written down about a license number, but I informed her to go get something from the registry that shows he's got a Chapter 91 license for 226 Monomoskoy. That dock has been in existence since 2002. I haven't received anything since he initially provided some information that I didn't know what it was related to, as far as whether it was evidence of a Chapter 91 license, but I said I wanted to see the license, not reference numbers to it. And I haven't received anything since. The other 266 Monomoskoy, also no Chapter 91 license. That dock, as you all know, is in progress of being built. It's mostly built with the exception of the float component. Several issues with this one: the lack of a Chapter 91 license, the jetting of piles, which was, as you all recall, you issued a negative determination for Mr. Smith to complete his dock in lieu of the expiration of his order of conditions, because most of it had been constructed and it was just the float and associated piles that was yet to be built. Well, those piles were jetted in, and that's a clear violation of the order of conditions, which prohibits jetting of piles, even partial jetting of piles. As a result of that, the project was issued a cease and desist work order, cease and desist order on May 31st. And by evidence of photographs from neighbors and video submission from neighbors, that cease work order was violated twice. And each time continued jetting of piles from the contractor. So when you put together the different violations, what I had recommended was the following for fines. For 226, no Chapter 91 license, $100 fine. Jetting of piles on two different occasions, $100 fine for each occasion for $200. Violation of cease and desist order twice, $300 fine for each violation, for a total of $600, for a total of fines for $1,000 for both properties. And my last recommendation, in lieu of violating a cease and desist work order twice, is to revoke his dock license at 266 Monomoskoy. So that catches you up to what was reviewed last week and what my recommendations are. I didn't get into the specific amounts of fines at the last meeting, but it totals $1,000 for both properties. And the reason I'm recommending a revoking of the dock license at 266, and I know you've heard some explanations from the applicant and his contractor at the last meeting, is because if you violate a cease and desist work order, I don't know whether recourses are available. That's kind of like the end. It says, hey, stop, because we need to figure this out, and it didn't stop. And the reason given, in my opinion, didn't offer any clarity whatsoever. They just said, I don't know why the contractor showed up again. Well, that's an excuse that anybody can use in any scenario, and in my opinion, it carries no weight at all. So those are my recommendations, and I'll just open it up for discussion.
The revocation of the permit for 266, is there can the applicant come back at some future time after a waited period and ask again?
That's up to you. That's your discretion. That's,
Okay.
yeah, I mean,
If
there are
the
many.
application comes forward, we would consider that.
Yeah, I mean, it's, it's ultimately your discretion as to how you want to craft the approach to enforcement. I would certainly recommend that the applicant pay the fines without, any sort of alternative to that, because they're clearly stated in, these fines were taken from what we have in our bylaw as far as, and it lists individual activities and what the recommended fines are. So that's where I got the fines from. They're not just arbitrary. They are tied to our enforcement section of the bylaw. As far as the revoking, it's just my recommendation for that is that, all other efforts have been exhausted and violated, and on more than one occasion, which makes it even more egregious. And so that's why I'm kind of like at a point where I'm throwing my hands in the air and asking, what else can we do to achieve compliance? Because when a cease and desist work order is violated twice, where do you go from there? Really, where do you go? Because it's.
So we would be essentially withdrawing the order of conditions? Is that what you're?
Revoking the permit.
Whereas at the present time, there's a cease and desist order in effect, which means that they cannot proceed until that's lifted.
Correct.
But they would still have the order of conditions to work on if it were lifted.
Have expired.
They've expired.
They are no longer relevant. So, and as it stands right now, in the lack of a Chapter 91 license, and I don't know how the expiration of an order of conditions comes into play with this at the state level, but right now the dock is considered an illegal nuisance structure under Chapter 91.
So if it's expired, do we really have any cause or need for any action at all in that respect? I mean,
Removal of the dock.
yes.
That would be included in the
Okay.
revoking of the permit.
That's an action.
As far as, I'd still need to do some legal research into how you approach an expired order of conditions with a revoking request or revoking order. I'd have to seek advice from our town council as far as how that would be achieved. But
Well, there is no existing permit for the dock, really. There is something from the town.
It hasn't been
but
closed
there
out
is
by a
no-
certificate of compliance, though, so it's still technically, the order's expired, so you can't do any further work on it, but the orders are still in effect because they haven't been closed out by a certificate of compliance. So.
Right. Okay, and on the other hand, but there is no state license.
And there's no state
Permit, so-
license, right?
So it seems like the next step is to whether we're going to ask them to remove the dock.
That's
But that's not being brought before us tonight, I guess, or is it?
Yes.
You want to wait
Yeah,
until?
that's the.
No, I
third-
think
his
that's,
third point.
the applicant
Part of the
requested time
revocation,
to
right.
seek legal counsel to come back before the commission, so you withheld any enforcement actions until this evening, so he'd have a chance for legal representation, which
Sure.
is here tonight, so.
True, you're also calling for a $100 fine, when in fact, Chapter 29, Bylaw 29, basically says it can be to $300 per occurrence. So
Well,
you've
it's-
chosen a fine much smaller than what we stated here under enforcement.
Right, I had, and again, this is your discretion, I had kind of weighted the fines based on how I could draw a comparison to our fine schedule with each violation. So cumulatively, it's $1,000 in fines, but individually, some fines are less than $300 and some are at $300. I put the max fine at $300 for the violation of the cease and desist order. which happened twice, which doubles that fine because we can fine for each instance of a violation or each day that a violation persists. That's stated under the bylaw. It was violated twice, which results in that $600 fine. And also the jetting of piles occurred twice, which I had a $100 fine for each, for a total of $200.
It seems reasonable to me. I mean, typically, we don't rely heavily on fines in situations having to do with either RDAs or NOIs, understanding that the damage to the applicant is severe if they're simply not allowed to go ahead with the project they want to pursue. This is an extreme case. It seems like we have to, impose a fine, but we don't need to impose a maximum necessarily. The ignoring a cease and desist, that's just so over the top. I think we have to go with the maximum on that. I think the suggestions made by Drew are very reasonable.
My only point was I'm not suggesting we go to the maximum, but the fact of the matter
Sure.
is that I think Drew has come up with a nice compromise. He could very easily have slapped the maximum by the bylaw on there, and it could have been much more severe than what you're recommending.
It could have been more. It could have been
Exactly.
$300 for each violation.
Exactly.
So-
It would have been a huge number. Okay.
And ultimately, it's really your discretion as to what fines are. That schedule of fines is a recommendation. It's not set in stone. It's at your discretion.
Does anyone in the audience have anything they'd like to contribute to this?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Attorney Christopher Crane, I represent Mr. Smith, who is here with me. The first thing I'd like to address is the lack of a Chapter 91 license on 226. I do have a copy of that license. It was issued back in 2007. So at least for that issue, and that is from the Registry of Deeds. So at least for that issue, I think that that's a non-issue. There is, in fact, a Chapter 91 license. It was, in fact, issued back in 2007. And so you have the recorded license as well as the recorded plan. So I think as it relates to the fine related to specifically that issue, I think that that could be withdrawn.
Let's give the agent a moment.
Is there an address on here?
I think all it says is on the Scored Road.
How come it doesn't say the stated address?
That I couldn't tell you. I didn't apply for the license. It's from 2007. But I think that the plan that's referenced is the same license number. It's 226.
Yep. Yes.
And as I say, the plan and the license they have the same
Yep.
number, so they're
Yep.
consistent in that
Okay.
regard.
Yeah, I agree.
So that would remove how much for the,
100.
just 100?
Yeah.
So getting the easy issue out of the way, obviously. As far as the fines that have been proposed by Mr. McManus, my client is not going to challenge those fines. He understands that there were some issues with regard to the jetting. There was also some issues with regard to debris. Conservation Agent can confirm that the debris was removed from the property as requested. And my client concedes that there was a violation of the cease and desist order. Last week, I was not here, but the contractor was here, as well as Mr. Smith. The contractor took full responsibility for the violation of the cease and desist. So whether you find his arguments unavailing or you think he's lying, the contractor came here that day and took responsibility. So Mr. Smith was not the person in the videos. He was not the person in the pictures. While, yes, ultimately he owns the property, it's his contractor, he has some responsibility. Again, why we are conceding that the fines would be appropriate, we're not challenging those. And Mr. Smith did not direct the contractor to do the work or to be there, and gave explicit instructions that he not be there. And this could just be a contractor who's not familiar with conservation, but he took responsibility. He took responsibility in front of this board.
Surely he was familiar with the cease and desist order, not to mention two.
Well, I can't speak for him. I don't represent him. All I can tell you is he came before this board and took responsibility last week.
Was he a local contractor?
AGL, Darwin, Warren, yeah. There's a bunch of
Well, if he does work in Bourne, he's from Bourne, he probably should be familiar. But again, you know, I don't represent him, and he did come before this board, you know, saying that he takes responsibility for that and was not directed by Mr. Smith to do that. You know, really my concern is the draconian recommendation that I'm not sure whether there's authority to revoke his permit or to make him take the dock out. I think you're doing more harm than good if you're going to have him remove a dock that's 90% complete. And I would suggest that this dock being 90% complete, other than the jetting issue, I think is in compliance with your performance standards. So if there's no issue with the cease and desist, I think this dock, when completed, would get a certificate of compliance. So I don't know that removing the dock is really the appropriate measure, you know, especially given the fact that, you know, fines are going to be imposed and my client's, you know, conceding those fines. As far as the expiration of the order of conditions, my understanding from my client is, Drew can correct me if I'm wrong, but there was an extension granted by this board. He came before this board and an extension was granted.
Right, but it's still expired.
But
The extension didn't carry to the time, you had to go through a negative request for determination of applicability because it was clearly shown your orders had expired after that extension. Your extension didn't bring you up to the current time. So that's irrelevant.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
But I thought we were okay to proceed at that point.
You were. The orders are still expired. It was a courteous move by the commission to authorize a negative determination for you to finish your dock despite the issue that the orders and conditions were expired. So there's no gray area there. They're expired.
Well, again, it sounds like the commission, you know, at least gave my client the benefit of the doubt to be able to complete the project.
Right, so,
You know,
in lieu of that, you know, you see what happened.
Well, I understand that, and I'm not here to suggest that somebody wasn't there and did what they, you know, I'm not challenging what's being alleged wasn't done by the contractor, that he wasn't there. But again, I think to remove a dock that is in existence, that is 90% complete, that all that needs to be done is put the pilings in for the float and have the float installed. Mr. Smith will be there. He'll make sure that that contractor is not left alone. The contractor's only doing the piling work. He doesn't have anything else to do on this project. Again, I just think that, you know, given the fact that, you know, there will be fines imposed, my client, you know, certainly would pay those fines and would not do any work until those fines were paid. You know, again, I just don't see the authority to require the removal of the dock. I just think you're going to start removing piles out of a salt marsh and then have them come back, or another owner come back and request the same thing and potentially have that granted by this board. It doesn't make sense. You know, again, I understand, you know, the seriousness of the allegations. Mr. Smith understands the seriousness of the issues. You know, we're here to try to work with the board. You know, I think that the board's goal is compliance. It's not removal of structures. If this structure was built out of compliance, you know, if it wasn't meeting the performance standards, then I could see this board saying, hey, you know, you built something that was either unpermitted or, you know, the spanses weren't correct or wasn't the right height. Then I could potentially see, you know, the board maybe taking such a drastic action. But in this particular case, to my understanding, you know, putting the jetting aside for a moment, there's no other non-compliance with this dock. So again, you know, obviously we're at the mercy of the board in this regard and the recommendations, but I just think that, you know, requiring removal is really a draconian remedy in this particular case.
Well, there are a couple of substantial issues with the compliance. One is that it was constructed improperly by jetting, which is a serious matter, which I mean, myself, I find it very difficult to believe that the contractor did this not knowing that he was doing something that was absolutely not allowed by the town of Mashpee. I would have expected that the owner would have been sufficiently familiar with the regulations that he would realize that. I mean, we had gone through the process. We issued him an order of conditions which among other things, stated that that was not to be done. I am not thrilled with the idea that someone can come in here, do thousands of dollars worth of work, pay an additional $1,000 fine, and then just be fine with it, finish the job later. I mean, what would your argument change if he went ahead and put in a couple more pilings and floated it? Or would we once again be told, well, you shouldn't be asked to take it out? I mean, it's okay. It would be in compliance. We don't even have a state permit to build the thing. So at what point does the commission simply ignore, you know, blatantly improper actions on the part of the homeowner?
Well, I don't think that this board is ignoring those things. They issued a cease and desist order, granted, it was violated, and they are issuing fines, and we're here before you.
Well, see, our concern is the cease and desist order did not work.
I understand that, but again, I think there's mitigating circumstances with regard to Mr. Smith, you know, that he wasn't the one who performed. Again, he wasn't the one there. He's not on the pictures. He certainly didn't instruct the contractor to do that. You know, the contractor came here again and took responsibility for those actions.
The only issue with that, with what you just said, is that both Mr. Smith and the contractor signed a form that said they read and understood the order of conditions.
I
So,
don't,
that, you know,
I
the
don't disagree
excuse
with
that they're
that.
presenting in any defense of that excuse or defense of their actions before this board don't address what happened in the least bit.
I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying that, you know, when you're
His
balancing.
effort to come before the board and acknowledge that it's his fault doesn't excuse his signature on a form that says he read and understood the order of conditions.
I'm not saying that it doesn't. All I'm saying is when you balance it versus what you're requesting this board to do, which is to remove the dock. That's what I'm saying. There's a balance
There
there.
could be other actions the board could take.
Oh,
I mean, my biggest concern is this dock and the current homeowner, and what's going to happen, you know, moving forward. One of the other suggestions that I would have is if you don't agree with a revoking of the dock permit, is to put a restriction of some kind on completing the dock until such time as more responsibility is, you know, a pattern of responsibility is presented, and there's some sort of, you know, trust, if you will, between this board and the applicant, because he's clearly shown a very consistent pattern of mistrust and non-compliance, and I don't think you should just ignore that.
To that idea, Drew, Mr. Crane mentioned that the dock was being built to spec, and if you had inspected it, you would find that it's completely, would meet the order of conditions. Do you think that's true? When you went out there,
No,
you
I
were out
don't,
there for
because-
another problem. You didn't examine the dock compared to the
Right.
plan, and was it built to specifications?
I don't know that because it hasn't been applied for a certificate of
Right.
compliance, but
But if we were to condition any changes of what we're talking about, that the dock that is in place there, is it acceptable or not?
No.
Does it match?
I would say no, because there were 2 occasions where the contractor was caught jetting in piles, and I don't even know if that's the extent of the piles that were jetted in. I do know that jetting of piles, and I've talked to other marine contractors about this, is that that's not a stable way to install a pile. It doesn't cause any suction. It doesn't take much storm surge to dislodge that pile or weaken it, which affects the entire integrity of that portion of the dock as far as the safety goes, or release of piles and becoming storm-borne debris into the marine environment. So the extent to which jetting of piles has happened is unknown. We only have proof of 2 separate times where it was witnessed by the town's harbor master and neighbors where piles are being jetted in, but there could be more. So I would say no, the dock is not in compliance right now. Those are clear violations of the order conditions, and there are issues with the integrity of the dock right now,
So
unresolved
Would a
issues.
condition be, or another idea being that the pilings that are there, which will make the assumption, right or wrong, that they were all jetted, because that contractor seems to be comfortable jetting things, even
Yes.
when the whole
It's a
town is
logical,
looking at it.
yeah.
He jets it again, okay? Let's assume that can we go back and drive those so that they are stable, so that they would meet the order of conditions, even though they have been jetted previously?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe that's a condition that we have, if it helps to remedy the situation.
Let me, one thing before I just ask my question. We have applied for the Chapter 91 license for this project, so I want to be able to give a copy to the board so they have that, so they know that we're working on that as well, that we're not.
That was one of my questions, why wasn't applied for, was that one of the conditions, the order of conditions to apply for Chapter 91 license?
Yes. And it's, you know, at every dock hearing that I've been a part of, it's part of the process to tell the applicant while they're here or their contractor that a Chapter 91 license is required, and proof of that license, recorded license, must be submitted to the department in order for construction to proceed. And considering this is Mr. Smith's second dock project, the other one which was proof submitted he had a Chapter 91 license for, what is the excuse for this one?
Yeah, because it's saying
That
why.
dock- That dock was constructed in 2002 at 226 Monomoskoye.
Was there any personal,
Do you have any general idea of the date? No, no. And 2007 is when the Chapter 91 license was recorded? So after construction? Yeah, so.
was there any personal hardship, family, anything, health that was going on that prevented, your client from properly supervising the project?
It happens to be a really busy time of year for me, so I'm working 60, 70 hours a week. And I couldn't be at the job when he was there. Plus, I didn't know when he was going there. He'd be there, then he'd leave, then he'd come back. And I never really could follow his schedule. And I actually completed about 75% of this, 80% of the stock myself, and there were no issues whatsoever, myself and my guys. But when I got to the water, I couldn't put the piles in. Otherwise, I would have done it myself, and we wouldn't have had any of these issues. But unfortunately, I had to hire this guy to do the piles because I don't have the equipment or any knowledge of how to do it. And that's when the problems began. I wish I could have done it myself, to be honest with you, just for cost savings, and then I'm in control. And I think I have been throughout that project except for him. And having to do it over again, I wouldn't hire him. But unfortunately, I know that now, and it's a little too late.
In talking with Mr. Smith, he can correct me if I'm wrong. I think if it was a question of, correcting the jetting issue, if it's feasible to put, remove the piles and put them in correctly, I think he would be open to a condition in that regard. So, again.
How would the commission be assured that if that was a condition moving forward, that would actually take place? What do you suggest?
Well, I guess we could do a couple of things. I guess we could keep record of when or notify the commission before the piles are being put in. I think that would be the best way to do it. If we notify Drew before they're going in, so that if he feels that he needs to be there to oversee it, then I think that would be the best way. I think that's the best way to ensure it, other than, recording it happening. I guess that would be one suggestion.
Who developed the site plan for this project?
Cape and Islands, John Slavinsky.
Okay, so in lieu of Attorney Crane's idea you just mentioned, having the commission and the agent review, why doesn't Cape and Islands, as a professional engineer, oversee this project and certify that this dock is meeting all of the guidelines of the wetlands?
Yeah, so it's an as-is plan for the project.
Right. Part of the problem with that is John is now retired. The person I hired to do it, he's now retired.
I was wondering about the document you submitted the last time around, that John's name was on it. I said, where did that come from?
Yeah, I think John's assisting Mr. Smith, he is retired. I guess before I would commit to that, I guess we'd have to ask Mr. Slavinsky if that would be something he could do. As I say,
As long as is his license still valid? Is he? Those are questions that you have. Whereas opposed to if we went to Cape and Islands now, just have one of their professional engineers oversee this particular effort. Then you've got a licensed engineer who's at his license at risk if he's not doing what he's been told to do.
Yeah, and it takes the onus off the board and the agent. So a professional engineer is certifying that everything is up to code.
And we certainly can. We can still at least notify the board that it's happening, so if Drew chose to go there without obviously the requirement that, certainly we, give the notice as well, just to be extremely cautious, given that, given obviously what's happened, what the history is.
Well, I would recommend if the commission were to go with these suggestions, that we receive proof of certification from whoever the engineer is to our office. Right. And that engineer, that you require that engineer submit reports and the applicant pay for monitoring by the engineer on site during construction, or reconstruction rather, so that we know, because I'm not going to, I've got so many other things going on, I'm not going to dedicate a chunk of my time to a compliance issue. So I think that burden should be placed on the applicant to hire the professional to submit reports to us to make sure it's being done the right way. And then payment of the fines.
Yeah, we should have a repair plan. If you're worried about the jetted piles breaking loose in the storm situation, and say, okay, what's the remedy? Do you do a driven pile next to the jetted piles and attach them together? Or,
right. What's
something,
the best? best solution.
Yeah, have the engineer
for-
come up with the best solution
Sure.
to meet all the requirements. And then
I just want to,
along with the
my
Chapter
biggest
91
concern
license.
is that, any sort of remedy scenario involves someone who actually knows what they're doing and is compliant, and, isn't going to show up when they're told not to, or, just, I want to get as far away from that as possible.
And so do I, believe me. I wish I never hired this guy.
It seems to me that what we need overall is we need nothing to happen on site until a new NOI has been approved, which includes remediation of the current situation.
That's probably the best way to do it, is to require a new NOI filing. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, we need to know that, for example, we need the engineer to tell us whether those piles, for structural reasons, need to be removed or not. If so, how they can be removed is something we should have some control over, since there is obviously plenty of opportunity to cause problems in the waterway in the removal of the piles. And so the entire plan, starting with where we are now, getting to the structure you need for your purposes, should be laid out as a plan for the engineer to bring before us before anything else happens. Did you have something you'd like to say? Please, if you'll come forward and identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Andrew Gottlieb, Pickle Cove Road, I'm one of the selectmen. I'm speaking for myself on this matter. To my mind, listening to what I've listened to tonight, what I've learned throughout the process here, I think, at the end of the day, this is really a decision that you have to make about whether your rules and regulations mean anything, or whether the cost of violation just becomes the cost of doing business, and it's relatively small compared to the cost of an overall project, and, what's another $900 on a dock installation. So, to my mind, if you don't back your agent, back your own regulations, and make a clear statement that activities have to be done in compliance with your rules and regulations, and that there are meaningful consequences if you don't, then no one has any incentive other than coming before you to get the plan stamped to not do whatever they want. And so I think the issues of this stand on their own face for you to take a strong action. I would recommend, from my perspective, that you follow the recommendations of your agent. And if you step back at all and think about what this means to future compliance with wetland rules and regulations in the town of Mashpee, if you don't, you're completely undercutting your entire operation. And I just don't see any justification for that, because any permit holder can come in and say, almost no permit holder does the work themselves. And so part of the answer can be, I'm not the one doing the work, so I'm not responsible for the work that's done on my property, then nobody's responsible for anything. At which point, I don't know why we have the rules that we have. I don't know why we spend money on the agent. I just don't understand what the point of your entire activity, existence, and regulations are.
So, Mr. Gottlieb, do you have a specific plan of action that you think would be
I think
appropriate?
you should do what you think you should revoke. I think you should follow what Drew recommended. I think the fines are, in my opinion, light in context with the overall cost of the project. I think that you should revoke the permit to make a point. I think you should order the thing removed. If he wants to come back in and get a new permit and a new license and a new dock, then that's fine. And if he can, if he or anyone else can meet your performance standards to your satisfaction, the work's going to be done appropriately, given the history, then that's how it ought to happen. But anything that basically leaves it in, basically says that, I can hire an attorney and I can do a little bit of remedial work, but basically what I wanted to do is what I wanted to do, and I got away with it. And, I'm willing to concede the fact that while there may be some more disruption by taking it out, the avoided disruption from future illegal activity that is dampened by the fact that you stood up for your own rules far outweighs any negative potential impact to the resource area that you're worried about. The other thing I will convey to you that I can feel beyond myself is that I know there's a concern about getting into litigation. The conversation I have with the town manager, we do not shy away from standing up for our own rules and regulations and procedures and going to litigation if we need to, if there's a valid basis and there's a principle and the implementation of our rules is at stake. And in my conversations with him, my personal feeling is this is one of those instances, from what he conveyed to me, he views this as one of those instances where we need to stand firm as a community and uphold the standards that we put in place. Otherwise, we're not sure what we're doing here. Thank you for your consideration.
If I may, I have to respectfully disagree with Mr. Gottlieb. We haven't threatened litigation, so I think it's a little bit imprudent to come up to this vote.
You suggested litigation. I'm addressing the board's concern about not having to go back to, any concern the board may have, but not having to go back to management, town council, resources for potential litigation.
Let's let him finish.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I obviously didn't interrupt Mr. Gottlieb during his presentation. And, we've come here to try to come to a resolution. I think, at the end of the day, compliance is the goal. It's the goal of the state. If you look at the state's website, their goal is compliance. Ultimately, their goal is compliance. And here we're trying to get to compliance, and we're trying to find the best way to get to compliance. And I think we've done that without having to remove the dock. We've come up with a plan that requiring my client to come back with a new notice of intent with a registered engineer to review the jetting issue, and if in fact the jetting of the piles requires some further action, then my client's going to undertake that action. So he's working to bring this dock into compliance with this board, and I think that's the ultimate goal. And I just think that that's the goal, not punitive to have him get the dock removed.
Thank you. I have a concern with what I heard to be a suggestion that removal of the piles would have a punitive effect, that would be a way of deterring others. In my view, the commission has certain guidelines under which it can apply punitive measures, which is a list of fines that are very specific, and they are not generally very large. That is simply how the codes are written. In addition, the idea of removing the piles, to me, in principle, it sounds like a good one, but I wouldn't want to see that done except under an order of conditions that's talked about how the piles are going to be removed, who by. And I would like to bring up one other possibility, something that we haven't quite gotten into for some reason. I wonder if we should not move against the contractor. In the real world, the ordinary homeowner, in particular those who live in other states and only have property here that they use part-time, does rely on the contractors and the engineers that he talks to here. And if we allow the contractors to blatantly disregard the regulations of the town, we're just begging for more trouble down the road. The contractors should be responsible for understanding what our regulations are. They should be coming to us if they feel that there's something going on the property that they're working on that's incorrect. We shouldn't be simply leaning on the homeowners in each case. So I would like to see the agent look into the possibility of levying fines against the contractor in this matter.
Sure.
And of course, just bringing it up, it would mean, it will publicize the fact that this contractor has acted in ways that were inimical not only to the town but also to his client, potentially. At least that would be brought to the public's attention that some such event had occurred. I'd like to see that happen. But again, I don't see using forcing of the removal of the piles as a reasonable deterrent measure. I think what we want to do here is we want to limit damage to the ecology. And if the engineer tells us that the best thing to do here is to follow an overall plan which includes leaving the piles in place or perhaps driving them further, taking some other step of that sort, then that's probably what we should allow for. Now, if the commission decides that a dock simply shouldn't be going in there, then we would want to see a plan for removing the piles, period. But if there's going to be a dock put into place, I don't want to see more damage done to the environment by first removing the piles and then reinstalling them unnecessarily.
So just for regulatory reference, 172-6 of the bylaw, Chapter 172, coordination with other requests under Section D. For good cause, the commission may revoke or modify a permit issued under this chapter after public notice and public hearing and notice to the holder of the permit. The time requirements specified in 172-5 shall be applicable. So if you were to move for, in favor of revoking the dock permit, it is stated in here that you have the authority to do so. However, we would have to advertise in the newspaper as a public hearing rather than a post-agenda item. So
Okay.
that would be the only stipulation if you were to move forward with that recommendation. But it's there, and the regulation says you're under your authority to do so.
That automatically stipulate the removal of the dock, or would it effectively put a moratorium on further construction?
That is something I would need to seek legal opinion on, because it doesn't really specify here what revoking actually entails. I would think at a minimum, yes, it would prohibit any further work.
Sure.
And as far as, you know, what actions would take place after that, I would have to.
Because there seems to be a middle ground here between, on one hand, what amounts to a do-over, and the other hand, what amounts to completely removing all the structure and then possibly going right back in later and putting it back in. I would like clarity on that possible decision of revoking the license, the dock remaining in, if it is structurally sound. If not, it would have to be brought up to code, as we talked before. And we would essentially have a freeze on activity as...
I mean, I think it would be of benefit for me to get some answers from legal counsel before you choose a particular direction. And I think that, you know, as I just stated from the regulation, that this just does require posting of a hearing and advertisement in the paper before you choose any particular action.
You're saying we cannot revoke it without a
hearing, public hearing. Yep.
Okay.
Notice has been given to the applicant, so it's been partially done, you know, in accordance with the bylaw standards, but that public advertising in the paper needs to take place.
So is this a situation where we need to continue until that scheduled date?
We haven't opened a hearing, so
Yeah.
there's nothing to be continued.
Yeah.
This is just a discussion.
It's just a discussion.
Yeah, no, I hear, well, I hear both sides. I understand what Mr. Gottlieb said about supporting the agent and regulations and everything like that. But, you know, Mr. Chairman's idea about further destroying the habitat area is also important too. So it seems like Chet said, there must be some sort of middle ground where we can, you know, support our regulations, support our agent, but not damage the wetlands further. So, you know, it's a tough decision, and
There seems to
need
be
to
a-
work our way through
There
that.
seems to be a consensus for moving towards revoking the current permit. If that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
But the details of how we proceed, we can get more information in the public hearing that we're going to advertise.
Well, I guess based on what Drew read, it seems to me, and what I think my client has agreed to, is basically what amounts to an effective revocation of the permit, where no more work is to be performed until he submits a new NOI. And I think that's what we've agreed to that. So I don't know. I guess the question would be, really what I'm concerned about is there going to be a request to remove the dock and the pier? That's really what my concern is. I'm agreeable to, and I think Mr. Smith is agreeable to coming back before this board with a new notice of intent and, you know, not having any work done until that new notice is performed. So I think that, you know, I think we're kind of all on the same page in that regard. You know,
Well, I think that the way, from my understanding of the regulatory statute that I just read, is that, you know, we kept this as a post-agenda item to kind of work through and present, you know, discussion items and ideas and, you know, moving forward for compliance. Any formal action, whether it's for revoking or requiring of a new permit, has to be advertised in the paper. the way I understand that regulatory statute. So whether or not it's a decision to revoke or require a new NOI, it requires a public hearing either way.
Okay, so
So,
what
I
I'm
think
hearing then
that's-
is, there's nothing that, there's no enforcement action that can be taken tonight,
Correct.
even if we're all in agreement.
Correct.
No, wait,
That's my interpretation
that
of
being the
that.
fines, however.
Because it says it has to be in compliance with the timeline standards, and under the timeline standards, it has to be advertised in the paper 5 days prior to the, outside of 5 days prior to a hearing.
Okay, now,
Has to be the
but
matter of-
does that apply to levying fines for a?
No, it doesn't state that. That's for revoking under that statute. So I think the fines, you can certainly, finalize that tonight.
I mean, unless well,
I guess I would like to separate,
I mean, it used the words revoke or modify in that statute.
right.
So it didn't mention fines.
No, I understand. I'm not arguing whether, I'm not arguing about the fines, whether, if you want to impose those fines tonight or at a public hearing, I'm not arguing any of that point. What I was hoping to get to is an action plan tonight for my client, and if that was simply to request a new NOI, then, we would just proceed to do that.
is there anything to prevent him from starting work on a new NOI while this other NOI is hanging?
Is, anything? No. I mean, I wouldn't think so. It's just, he'd be doing it with, it would be unknown as to what your recourse would be, what your action is. That's the only thing that I see. I see it as that, you shouldn't have a plan of, how to address this until it's posted as a
Sure.
public meeting. I think that's really,
And we need more information.
and it'll give us time to get answer some legal questions
So-
moving
so
forward.
what
So
I
you
would-
can have
so
a
what I
better,
would-
more informed decision.
What I would like to do is I'd like to go ahead and impose the fines. I'd also like to direct the agent to look into bringing an enforcement action against the contractor. And beyond that, I would encourage the owner to think about how he wants to proceed, what his next step may be. If talking to an engineer might help you decide what would be best, if you brought us some information from a licensed engineer at the hearing that's going to take place, that would be very helpful.
Drew, the fines that you recommended, is that the maximum fines, or is that just
No.
recommended?
I mean, I had kind of weighed them based on this kind of like guideline sheet that has certain categories of violations and then recommended fines for each. The maximum that you can fine for each instance, for each violation, is $300 per violation. So I had, one of them was eliminated, which is the proof, they submitted proof of a Chapter 91 license for 226 Monomoskoye. That was a $100 fine that's been eliminated. So the other fines were 2 times jetting of piles, $100 each. Those could be increased to $300 each at your discretion. The violation of cease and desist orders twice, cease and desist order twice, that was a max fine for each at $300 per occurrence. And the Chapter 91 license, lack of for 266 Monomoskoye was a $100 fine. So total fines are $900, but two of the fines, constituting 3 violations, no Chapter 91 license, and 2 violations of the order of conditions are at $100 apiece. They could be raised to $300 apiece. So
Maybe we should do the maximum on everything.
it's up
Yeah.
to you.
I have a problem with going to the maximum. That's why I brought it up before, earlier in the conversation. How come it says right here it's $300,
Right.
and we backed it down? So I think we stick to the maximum there. I think the other thing, talking about assuming that we proceed here, is that my concern is to making sure that all activity going forward is conditioned in some way so that we've got professional engineers overseeing the project, that we've got an installer that we trust and know only does good work, complying with the regulations of the town, the bylaws of the town.
So just to revise the fine, it's $1,500 is the total. That's $300 fine for no Chapter 91 license, $300 fines for each of the jetting piles violations, and 2 violations of the cease and desist order at $300 each, for a total of $1,500.
and there's a cease and desist stays in place.
And the cease and desist stays in
No work
place.
Goes forward.
Right.
And it's just gonna sit there, not disturbing any of the resource area
Yep.
at this particular point in time.
Yep.
And then Mr. Smith can decide whether, we have the other action we need to take care of. But once that action is taken care of, this hearing that you were referring to, we gotta deal with that.
Yes.
If we're gonna revoke the license.
Yeah.
Then,
That whole decision as to what course of action needs to take place at a public hearing. Yep.
so then whether it is positive or negative in regards to the revocation, then we have the issue of what do we do with the dock. So if the
Right.
decision is the dock's gotta come out, then it's different.
Correct.
But that's made at that point, at the.
It's made at
It
that
was
point.
made at that
Yeah.
point. And so there's no discussion really about another request before here of an NOI in regards to it.
So I would ask for the purposes of tonight's meeting, someone make a motion for the issuance of $1,500 fine as outlined and have it formally
Is there
voted
any
on.
further comment on that from anyone present?
No, as I start off my presentation, we're not challenging the fines by this commission. Again, as far as, the deterrence factor, I mean, I'm sure Mr. Smith doesn't want us, pay $1,500, so, to be here, and I'm sure he doesn't want to, have to be here and explain himself to this board. I think, just to think that people are just gonna, willy-nilly just violate the commission orders, just so they, just pay a fine, and that's the end of it. I just think that's, I don't think that's an accurate statement. I sat on the Town of Sandwich Conservation Commission for almost 15 years, and, we never revoked a permit in the 15 years I was on it. And, I think fines and enforcement actions were a deterrent enough.
Well, we've seen some odd things happen, but this one has been particularly troubling.
I understand that, absolutely, and, I think, by Mr. Smith bringing me in here, I think has helped try to get us to find some common ground. And I think that's ultimately the goal. Again, as I said before, I think ultimately the goal for this commission, is compliance with the regulations. And if we can get to that point, then I think that benefits everybody.
Seems like this kind of forethought a little while ago, we could have avoided this entire.
I don't disagree with you.
So do we have a motion?
I would move that we, whatever the proper wording is, that we instigate a total fine of $1,500, which is the maximum allowable by our bylaws, and I don't have the number in front of me, Regulation 27.
No, this is, excuse me, just one moment. This
Is in Regulation 27.
It's the bylaw.
Get to the bylaw.
Bylaw section 1, sorry, 1 second. (172-6), section, sorry. So 172-11, enforcement violations and penalties. 172-11.
Okay. So that I would propose that we instigate the maximum fine under bylaw 172-11, section,
This 172-11.
that's it, okay, in the amount of $1,500.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay,
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
thank you, guys.
Another question from the board?
Please.
What's your intention about authorizing a notice for potential revocation? Are you deferring on that?
We're going to have we'll have to have a hearing.
You had a motion and a vote to do a revocation hearing?
No. We can't do that without public hearing
I'm saying,
advertisement.
to
Right, but
to
that would
start
be-
the process for public hearing.
You
Is that
caught
going
me
to
at
proceed?
the comma, where I would continue to say there's more business in regards to this entire matter, which is the question of revocation and the hearings or whatever is required under the law. So we still have to do that.
I think you need to make a motion to have this as a public hearing
Okay.
matter to be
Motion
determined.
To initiate the process for having a public hearing on the matter before this commission,
Revocation,
a revocation of,
the docks at 266.
revocation of dock at 266 Monmouth Island.
Right, absolutely.
Thank you.
You have to take.
I need a second.
Second, and then.
Aye.
I need a.
Oh, you
I
want a
need
second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
If I got
Oh, I'm
your
sorry.
aye,
I said the aye before, okay, so I'll say aye.
right. We got 4.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just getting hungry, that's all.
Okay, moving to just a.
Oh, and Drew, you will be able to look at moving against the contractor?
I'm sorry?
You're gonna be-
Yes, I will, yeah. I think that I'll work out the violations specific to the contractor, which is 2 violations of a cease and desist work order and 2 violations of the permit conditions at $300 apiece, so that's $1,200 in fines for the contractor.
You gotta talk to town council in regards.
And I have to talk to town council as far as
Several
procedural questions
issues,
for
yeah.
town council as far as what follows the public hearing. I think it's pretty clear that you have a choice, your discretion at the public hearing, but as far as what follows up with that, I'd just like to get some legal clarity.
Ask the board to also consider whether, maybe first question for council, whether you can preclude that contractor from doing work of this sort in town for some defined period of time.
Yeah, yep.
Oh, for sure. I mean, he's not on any of our lists of folks. I mean, I'm not sure that the gentleman, when he was in here, was even stated clearly. I mean, we had a hard time even hearing him because he never came up here. He just kind of mumbled off in the corner. I mean, it's not a good situation, so you're absolutely right.
You don't want him working in town.
Nope.
Absolutely.
Correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. You all have in your folders a revised version of Regulation 27, docks and piers.
Yep.
And you have the existing language. I just wanted to present that to you tonight so you could look it over, see what you think. What I basically did was the wording for the existing regulation is really off the charts. It's very, very wordy. It's hard to cite any particular section because it wasn't really formatted very well in terms of like sections 1, 2, 3, ABC, 1, 2, 3, subsets, all that kind of stuff. So I reformatted it to make it much easier for ease of reference. And a lot of the information was taken out, a big chunk of the wording in Regulation 27 was taken out of our Regulation 3 plan requirements, submittal requirements on plans. And it's already stated in Regulation 3 what those requirements are for docks and piers, so there's no sense in restating that entire section in this regulation, so I just took it all out. And you'll see that when you look at the existing compared to the proposed.
Seven pages to 4 pages.
Yeah, so I cut out a lot of fat and just, unneeded wordiness is really what it came down to. I didn't change the meat of the regulations.
It's a general problem.
I loved your moves. I mean, it just, get rid of it. It's just people talking for the sake of talking.
It's been a general problem with the regulations that things are repeated.
Exactly.
And of course, it brings up the possibility of a problem where one thing gets changed and the other doesn't later, too. So the
Yeah.
more that we get rid of, the better.
Yeah, and we're working through it to do just that, because a lot of the regulations are the same in that respect, that they're overly wordy, they repeat incessantly, which, I understand the reasoning behind that, just case in point.
Yep.
You can't state the regulations enough, so, but I like to make it easier for public reading. When I don't cringe when I say, please see section B1 subset A of the regulation, and then they come back and say, I have no idea what you're talking about, so I just want to make it easier for the public to understand. So look that over, and we'll table any sort of official motion. We'll put it in the paper for, if that's okay, for 2 weeks from now to advertise for a public meeting, which is all we have to do for regulatory changes. Bylaw requires town meeting. Regulations only require posting in the public paper and hosting a public meeting, so.
Why don't you give us papers to sign while Caitlin gives us?
Yes, I will. Pass those around now.
When you're all at your full attention. I'm just kidding. So things are going well in general. We just started with our intern for the summer a couple weeks ago. She'll be here once a week. She's a graduate from Upper Cape Tech and is going to school for ecology and secondary education. So her main priorities will be to just get a general idea of the job, the different habitats, environment in Mashpee, exposure to the different aspects of it, and also to focus on promoting the volunteer programs that we have. She'll also be helping us with the pollinator presentation at the library on Sunday, July 7th at 10:30. It's a third presentation that we've collaborated with the library on their STEM grant. As of right now, I'm just doing a lot of general trail prep for the summer, just getting rid of all the overgrown and flooded areas. And the trees and shrubs we planted at Santua Pond Preserve are doing really well. I'm really happy about that. And then my next big project, just sort of in the near future, I've brought up before, but just to do an overhaul of the kiosks, to do those big, large print maps that I presented a few months ago. But hopefully I'll get some time in the near future to focus on that and just do a big overhaul, just so they'll be more usable and more aesthetically pleasing. And I also put a copy of the new newsletter, the third one that I've made in the 3 years I've worked here. That also just has some updated information on some fun activities that have occurred recently. And thank you for your time.
What do you do with pollinated gardens when one particular species of plant seems to take over the entire garden?
Weed?
I mean, I've just buy 2 pollinator gardens, and now all of a sudden, all there is a mass of yellow coreopsis. That's
You have to weed the gardens, and I'm not very good at gardening, so.
You don't like
Drew.
yellow coreopsis?
I have a procedural question. So for the 6th Jehu Pond continuation, since I was one of the members hearing it, one of the 4, I need to be here for the July 12th hearing, I assume.
It's probably a good idea. I don't know if it's an actual requirement, but
Okay.
you should
Because
be here,
I
'cause
can't stay for that whole meeting because I'm already booked into a Conservation Commission meeting in Bourne that night.
It is scheduled
That-
as the second hearing on the agenda.
Yeah, that
so-
starts at 7, so I can
Yeah.
be here for a half hour or so.
Okay.
like that.
Yeah, I think that
Okay.
would be good. I don't think it's required, like, as long as we have a quorum, but it's good if you've been involved in the discussion initially.
Yeah,
It's good to
I
have
just
you
wanted to
back.
double check that with you. No problem, I can have it in my calendar and
I
be here.
appreciate
so,
it. Yeah, thank you.
So,
that was pretty.
Drew, did I sleep through the application for agriculture withdrawal?
Oh, yeah, it wasn't, it was just something that we just wanted to point out.
The meeting isn't over, guys.
Yeah, it's not over yet. So there was Mr. Smith, this is just to point out something that was in your folder. There's nothing that he needed to do tonight, because I did ask him before the meeting what his intention was for his application before us, but he withdrew his aquaculture permit before the selectmen. And I guess his plan is to refile when he addresses some issues with the neighbors. So I asked him, are you planning on withdrawing from the commission, your NOI? And he said no, he's going to just continue to table it. However, it is your discretion, and I'm not saying this to pile on in any respect. It's your discretion that if continuances go on and on for an unreasonable period of time, and you feel that it's gone too much time has gone by for a review at that time, it's something to keep in mind moving forward. Not saying Mr. Smith can't continue; he can, just like anyone else, for valid reasons. But if it gets into the year-plus timeline from the initial application, conditions can actually change over that period of time, and so it may be wise to recommend a withdrawal at that point if he continues to continue, because I have no idea how long it's going to be before he resubmits an application before the selectmen.
When was it filed? What was the date?
His NOI with us
Yeah.
was filed, I believe,
2 months ago?
almost 2 months ago.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So if you get into like 6 months
You
or
get
something.
into you start getting into an extended time period, it's something to consider.
Right, so right now, he's under an extension, a continuance
continuous
of his
to-
NOI application
I believe
with
it's
us.
July 14th, I think is.
Okay.
Or July, no, the second
Sorry.
meeting in July.
July
Yeah.
12th.
Yeah.
And he
No,
can-
second
can he
meeting.
Oh,
continue-
second meeting, okay.
Can he continue to ask for continuance?
Yes, but it's always at your discretion as to whether or not you want to grant it. So
Right.
that's why I said,
Sounds like
I wouldn't
you-
recommend letting a huge chunk of time keep going by, because you can actually start to see changes in these resource areas, and that affects the application, so
Why
it's.
does it even come in this, why did we get it before the
It was his choice. You can't stop somebody from submitting an NOI. You can only make recommendations saying, hey, you got to go through all these other levels of approval. You might be submitting this a little early. I can't say you can't submit it. There's nothing, I don't have the authority to do that. They can submit whatever they want. They're just taking their chances as far as how long are we going to grant continuances? How long are we going to keep this into consideration? How much time is going to go by? That's a risk they take.
Well, these applicants who have to
They
go,
can submit for whatever timeline they want. I mean, it's,
but when an applicant has, needs to go before a number of different bodies, obviously it's going to be to their advantage to get some kind of feedback.
Right.
From each body, as they go, so.
Right.
I don't think we would want to discourage someone from doing that.
No, absolutely not. It's, and I did explain that to him. I said, you don't know what the timeline is to get all these other approvals, so keep that in mind when you submit your application, that this could take a while.
Yeah.
The board's not gonna hear it until everybody else gives it the thumbs up, so keep that in mind. And so I did explain that to him, and he was fine with it, so.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
I would move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.